Holy Gospel according to Matthew.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Jesus took with him Peter and James and his brother John, and led them up a high mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his face shone like the sun, and his clothes became dazzling white. Suddenly there appeared to them Moses and Elijah, talking with him. Then Peter said to Jesus, "Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, I will make 3 dwellings here, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." While he was still speaking, suddenly a bright cloud overshadowed them, and from the cloud a voice said, "This is my Son, the Beloved. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him." When the disciples heard this, they fell to the ground and were overcome by fear. But Jesus came and touched them, saying, "Get up and do not be afraid." And when they looked up, they saw no one except Jesus himself alone. As they were coming down the mountain, Jesus ordered them, "Tell no one about the vision until after the Son of Man has been raised from the dead." The Gospel of the Lord. So the Transfiguration story is one that appears in all of the Synoptic Gospels. So that's Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And each time I hear one version of the story, it seems that something new stands out to me. Sometimes my attention is drawn to the description of Jesus' bright shining face and the transformation of his clothes. Other times, Peter's statement about building dwellings captures my interest and leads me to think about where the triune God dwells. This week, though, Jesus' command to the disciples to get up and not be afraid has been resounding in my mind. So what exactly did the disciples have to fear? After seeing Jesus' physical presence be transformed and hearing the voice of God come down from a cloud, the disciples are a little freaked out. And who wouldn't be? To be in such close proximity to God, to be overwhelmed by the pure, dazzling light that marks the presence of God, would be blinding and a little bit terrifying. Not only was their vision overcome, but they also heard the voice of God speaking directly to them. More than just having their senses overwhelmed, I think the heart of the fear is knowing that a close encounter with God will also transform them, and so transform the world as they know it. God's call to discipleship ensures that the way things are will not remain the same. Listening and responding to the call of God can be challenging and can lead us to places that are uncomfortable and unfamiliar, challenging our assumptions about God, others, and even ourselves. This is something that has resonated in my own call to ministry. For a number of years, I had felt and experienced gentle nudges to ministry, all of which I was content to ignore. While I was helping to lead worship services in high school, a pastor suggested that leading worship could be a future career for me. I smiled and brushed it off, certain that I did not want to be a pastor, nor was I supposed to be. But despite my certainty, this mild pushing did not stop when I entered college. I found myself drawn to leadership roles within campus ministry and to the study of religion and theology. By the time I was a senior, I continued to deny that I felt a call to roster leadership within the church. I didn't want to change my life or my plans for something I wasn't sure I wanted to do. In part, I was also afraid of the ways in which answering this call would change me and my relationships with those around me. After all, it's not every day that a 20-something-year-old is interested in becoming a pastor. But because I'm standing here today, you can probably guess how this chapter of my story ends. Working through one of my college professors, God's gentle nudging turned into persistent tapping that I could no longer ignore. I finally applied for seminary, and in the fall of 2015, found myself in Gettysburg. Given my own call story, I can imagine that the disciples faced many similar challenges in their own calls to follow Jesus. They left behind family, friends, jobs, and their homes to answer their calls. Discipleship also transformed their very personhood, changing the way they related to God and interacted with others. In other words, the disciples were reshaped and reformed at the very core of their being. Yet even when the disciples were afraid of what they were experiencing, Jesus doesn't rebuke them or chastise them, but instead reaches out to them and tells them not to be afraid. As the manifestation of the presence of God, Jesus stays with them and encourages them to get up and to be bound by fear no longer. When we're afraid of answering our own calls, Jesus is with us too, telling us not to be afraid and helping us as we stand, while we too are being transformed by the very presence of God. In the midst of the reshaping of our lives, Jesus continues to come with support, encouragement, and guidance. While we're not all called to be pastors or ministry professionals, we are all called to be people transformed by personal encounters with the triune God. In this transformation, we have the promise of new and abundant life that would not be possible if we stayed the same. As one pastor has put it, divinity is not challenged by change, but in fact is revealed most fully within transformation. The Transfiguration is showing us, by example, that the change of God is beautiful and bright. The ultimate example of the change of God that is beautiful and bright is the victory of the resurrection. God takes what once was dead and brings new life. God's love for the world does not end with the crucifixion, but ends with the promise that death will be no more. In our lives, too, we experience a daily dying and rising. As part of our baptisms, we daily die to our old selves and our old ways of sin, rising to new life in Jesus Christ. Daily, we are transformed, and daily this transformation changes the way we live and act in the world. Our church teaches that as baptized people, we see our daily life as a place to carry out our vocation, our call. All aspects of life, home and school, community and nation, daily work and leisure, citizenship and friendship, belong to God. All are places where God calls us to serve. As we go forward to discern our own calls and vocations, may we hold on to Jesus' command, do not be afraid. May we have the courage to let go of our fear and embrace the new and abundant life that Jesus offers. Amen.